The assassination of President Abraham Lincoln would shock the nation. The man who understood the American paradox and was known as the Great Emancipator would have his life taken by a Southern zealot, John Wilkes Booth. A quote from Abraham Lincoln: "That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Lincoln truly believed in the American dream, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Lincoln wanted to be remembered for something great in his lifetime, and preserving what our forefathers had fought for was just that. This would eventually mean the emancipation of millions of slaves, thus resulting in America's bloody Civil War. Lincoln once said, "I am naturally anti-slavery. If slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong." His Christian views and strong morals allowed him to make a very hard decision that upset many in the southern United States. Emancipation of slaves turned the tide of the Civil War in the Union's favor, thus preserving the United States of America, which was Lincoln's primary goal. Many in the South, including John Wilkes Booth, took exception to this and conspired to assassinate the great emancipator. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky, to Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Due to a land dispute, the Lincolns were forced to move from Kentucky to Perry County, Indiana in 1817. When young Abraham was 9 years old, his mother died on October 5, 1818, of trematol, a milk sickness, at the age of 34. It was while growing into manhood that he received his formal education, and estimated total of 18 months, a few days or weeks at a time. Reading material was in short supply in the Indiana wilderness, and neighbors recall Abraham would walk for miles just to borrow a book. In March 1830, the family again migrated, this time to Macon County, Illinois. When his father moved the family again to Coles County, the 22-year-old Abraham Lincoln went out on his own, making a living in manual labor. He was known for his skill in wielding an axe, and early on made a living splitting wood for fire and rail fencing. Lincoln eventually migrated to the small community of New Salem, Illinois, where over a period of years he worked as a shopkeeper, a postmaster, and eventually general store owner. While living in the frontier of Illinois and after the Black Hawk War, Abraham Lincoln began his political career and was elected to the Illinois State Legislature in 1834 as a member of the Whig Party. He supported Whig politics of government, sponsored infrastructure, and protective tariffs. This political understanding led him to form his early views on slavery, not so much as a moral wrong, but as an impediment to economic development. It was around this time that he decided to become a lawyer, teaching himself the law by reading William Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England. After being admitted to the bar in 1837, he moved to Springfield, Illinois, and began to practice in the John T. Stuart Law Group. Lincoln would eventually turn to politics, and the Lincoln-Douglas debates are considered some of the best political speeches in history. After being elected president, Abraham Lincoln selected a strong cabinet composed of many of his political rivals, including William H. Seward, Salmon P. Chase, Edward Bates and Edwin Stanton, formed out of the adage, "Hold your friends close and your enemies closer." Lincoln's cabinet became one of the strongest assets in his first terms in office, and he would need them before his inauguration. In March 1861, 7 Southern states had seceded from the Union, and by April, the United States military installation at Fort Sumter was under siege in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. This would mark the beginning of America's bloody Civil War, where over 600,000 men lost their lives fighting for what they believed in. Money and power would be the root of this American tragedy. The abolishment of slavery in the United States would have drastic effects on not only the United States' economy, but also in the global marketplace, negatively affecting the lives of many Southerners. President Abraham Lincoln knew a house divided could not stand, and nor could a country. So, along with William H. Seward, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, as the nation approached its third year of bloody civil war. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are henceforward shall be free. The proclamation freed roughly 3 million slaves in 10 different states, thus changing the outcome of the Civil War in the Union Army's favor, and preserving the Union of the United States of America. The proclamation, however, angered many Southerners, including John Wilkes Booth. The bloodiest war in American history would finally come to an end after the Emancipation Proclamation ordered by Lincoln. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Virginia, surrendered his forces to the Union General Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, and the war, for all intents and purposes, was over. However, 5 days later, Lincoln would be assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, shocking the nation to its core. John Wilkes Booth was born in Bel Air, Maryland, on May 10, 1838, and attended school sporadically. Booth was the 9th of 10 children born to Mary and his famous actor and eccentric drunk father, Junius Brutus Booth. At their home in Maryland, they owned many slaves, so it is no wonder that John Wilkes Booth was accustomed to this way of life, and it is here where he probably developed his racist views towards African Americans and his pro-slavery beliefs. He was a strikingly handsome youth. He attracted many people, and early on decided to try the stage, like his father. Although unwilling to work at his parts in plays, his talent enabled him to win acclaim as a Shakespearean actor, especially in the Richmond, Virginia Stock Company. His father Junius and older brother Edwin were both actors as well, and like most siblings do, they tend to follow in their father or brother's footsteps. And Booth, John Wilkes that is, was no different. However, his father traveled all over the country touring and acting with John's older brother, more so than with John. Although it is said that John was not as good of an actor as Edwin, he still had talent and was very eccentric. Some even felt that he may have been mentally unbalanced. Nevertheless, what talent he did have and his good looks led him on a semi-successful acting career. He made his professional stage debut in Baltimore, Maryland at the young age of 17, joining a Shakespearean acting company from Richmond, Virginia. He gained much respect for his performances in Shakespeare's plays, as well as his stage presence and good looks. Booth was sympathetic to the Southern cause, and in 1859 he volunteered for the Richmond Greys of the Virginia militia. He was a part of the group that helped to capture and hang John Brown at Harper's Ferry. While conspiring and failing at earlier times and plots against Lincoln, on April 14, 1865, at 12 o'clock noon, on Lincoln's fateful day, Booth was made aware that the President and the First Lady would be going to a play that evening, and as luck would have it for Booth, in a theater he knew all too well. When he discovered that Lincoln would be attending a comedy play, Our American Cousin, at Ford's Theater, Booth must have jumped for joy at this opportunity to avenge the South. And in what better place for Booth but the theater, and one that he was intimately familiar with. This time, instead of lashing out at Lincoln from on stage, cloaked in lines and verse, Booth would have a chance to physically cut down the man he despised. He knew he could easily gain access to inside due to his fame and popularity on the stage. It would be totally inconspicuous if he were to be seen in and around Ford's Theater. No one would think anything afoot or even question him as to why he was there. His reputation allowed for this opportunity to be capitalized on. Booth would seize this moment in time and snuff out the life of the President of the United States of America. Booth's diabolical plan was not solely just for Lincoln. Booth wanted to also have killed Vice President Andrew Johnson, Secretary of State William H. Seward, and others such as the Secretary of War and the General-in-Chief of the Army, as these men were next in line for the presidency. Booth wanted to take no chances with the assassination of Lincoln, or have anyone else follow in the president's footsteps. On April 14th, 1865, the 16th President of the United States of America was shot in the back of the head at Ford's Theater with a .44 caliber single-shot Derringer pistol. With this single shot from a pistol small enough to conceal in his hand, John Wilkes Booth, the famous actor and Confederate sympathizer, catapulted into history on that faithful night, leaping out of the box where the president had been seating and down onto the stage, yelling the infamous phrase, "Sic semper tyrannis," the South is avenged, or loosely translated, death to tyrants, and exited stage left out of the back door, fleeing on horseback into the night and into American tragic history. Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., where Booth was an actor on stage and would eventually take the life of Abraham Lincoln. Although numerous physicians tended to the president shortly after his injury, he passed away the next morning. Lincoln has been recognized as one of the greatest presidents in American history. His assassination profoundly influenced the future of the United States, especially as the country was coming back together following the Civil War. Testaments to his lasting legacy can be seen in many places, from the stone carving of him on Mount Rushmore to his image gracing the $5 bill. The assassination of President Abraham Lincoln stunned a nation that was just emerging from the chaos and calamity of the Civil War, and the president's untimely death altered the trajectory of post-war history. Only 5 days after General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Confederate Army to the Union General Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, the president was assassinated. President Lincoln's generous terms for Robert E. Lee's surrender and reintegrated into society Lincoln's dream of healing a divided nation would end. But one man and his band of murderous accomplices, perhaps reaching into the highest ranks of the U.S. government, were not appeased. With the president dead, and if a few key members of his staff, Vice President Johnson and Secretary of State William H. Seward, were also, Booth felt this would send the Union government into total disarray and avenge the South's defeat. Word of the great emancipator's death and rumors of who was responsible spread like wildfire throughout the country. This would lead to the largest manhunt in history. Some 10,000 federal troops, police, and detectives all were searching for John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth and his accomplice fled into the night, but were eventually captured, and Booth would succumb to his injuries. After crossing the Potomac River with some difficulty, Booth and his co-conspirators arrived at Richard H. Garrett's farm in Port Royal, Virginia. And the federal troops were in hot pursuit. On April 26, 1865, they had caught up to the criminals who had been hiding in Garrett's barn. Booth refused to surrender, which caused the pursuers to set the barn on fire. While the barn was on fire, Booth would be shot by one of the investigators, Thomas P. Boston Corbett, a Union Army soldier. Corbett's intent was to shoot Booth in the arm, but the bullet struck him in the neck, and the shot paralyzed him. Booth was then carried from the burning barn, and 3 hours later he died on Garrett's porch. The wound caused Booth to suffer excruciating pain for his final hours. His final words were to tell my mother I died for my country. The assassination of Lincoln shocked the nation, but his impact on the United States of America would be felt forever. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us drive on to finish the work we are in to bind up the nation's wounds. Lincoln's vision of equality for all would finally be achieved with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, allowing for everyone to pursue the American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.